welcome back to episode 2 of Ramble Reviews. First and foremost, happy holidays. This is a little bit louder than the things that I usually wear, but I'm trying to be festive and fit the theme, so happy holidays. Anyway, so for today's episode, I read a book that I actually thankfully really liked this time. It's by an author that I know I've loved in the past, so I knew it was going to be a good book. I didn't even think I read the back of it. I just knew I liked her, and I liked her writing, and so I knew I would like it. So for today's episode, we are reviewing Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and let me tell you, I love Taylor Jenkins Reid, like, so much. I think this time last year, I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and then right after that, I read Malibu Rising. And if you've never read her books, start with those because they are probably her best. They were some of my favorite books that I've ever read. I think I said The Seven Husbands was my favorite book of 2023. Incredible. So I knew I would like this because I love her and I love her writing. And also, like, she has the cutest covers on her books that I've ever seen. So, like, you won't even know what it's about, but you're going to want to read it because her covers are adorable. So I knew this book would be a hit. And no matter, she's like Emily Henry in that sense, where it's like, no matter what the premise of the book is or what it's about, you know you're going to like it because they're that good of writers and their characters are so, like, relatable, and it's just such, a fun, easy read. So I knew it would be fun to read. So anyway, I'll give you a quick summary of this book. So this follows a girl named Hannah, and she's 29, and she's originally from Los Angeles, but her whole thing is that throughout her entire life, she couldn't kind of figure out what her purpose was and, like, where she was meant to be. So she tells you all about how she's lived in a bunch of different cities across the US and how she kind of just goes from one place to another without any real plan. She's just kind of hoping that wherever she lands, it'll kind of, like, fall into her lap of, like, what she's supposed to do and what her purpose in life is, and maybe that place will wind up being home. And so you kind of get the backstory that she's kind of by herself a lot. She, like I said, lived in Los Angeles, and her sister is like a ballerina, like a dancer. And so her family, her parents and her sister, they left Los Angeles to go live in London, and so that her sister could go to, like, a ballet school in London. And they left Hannah in Los Angeles. So Hannah winds up living with her best friend Gabby and Gabby's parents, and she winds up becoming one of the Hudsons, one of Gabby's family. And so basically, this story picks up when Hannah is 29 and she just gets out of a relationship with a guy named Mike in New York City, which was the last city she lived in. And the ending is kind of, the ending of her being in New York is kind of rocky. She eventually winds up breaking up with this guy Mike because she finds out at the end of their relationship that he was actually married and he had kids, and she just figured out that, like, New York was just, like, not the place for her. And so she's lived in all these different cities. She doesn't know where else to go. And so she doesn't know if she's going to stay there permanently, but she decides to go back to Los Angeles and live with Gabby and Gabby's husband, Mark. And so that's where the book picks up, is her being back in Los Angeles. Now, when she gets back, her and Gabby decide to go out to, like, a restaurant and have, like, a reunion with all of their high school friends now that Hannah's back in Los Angeles. And this is kind of where the premise of the book comes in, is that when they're at the bar, or they're at a bar in a restaurant, but when they're there, Hannah gets faced with two decisions. Her high school sweetheart, high school boyfriend, Ethan's there, and they broke up right when Hannah was a senior in high school and Ethan went to college, just because, like, they were too far apart. They both wound up meeting other people, but they've both, like, loved each other since. But then Hannah moved and everything kind of fizzled out. So she gets a chance to make a choice. She can either stay at the restaurant with Ethan, or she can leave the restaurant and go home with Gabby and Mark. And I think the premise of this book is so cool and so interesting because it's all about like the butterfly effect and how one choice you make kind of dictates the entire lifetime course of outcomes. And so I think it's really cool because I think a lot of people think like, what if I made that decision? What if I did that? And I think like being able to see like what happens if is really cool. So I think the premise of this book is awesome. And I also really like that this book alternates chapters. I love an alternating timeline or point of view. I think that's what keeps books more engaging and more entertaining because you're kind of, things aren't dragging on. You're moving topics quickly, and to me, I like that because I get a break and then I get to come back. And so this book alternates chapters, and it alternates like lifetimes basically, where you see the results play out of Gabby's choice or Hannah's choice of leaving with Gabby, or Hannah's choice of leaving with Ethan. So you kind of see how those realities play out for Hannah. So in a nutshell, in the one timeline, when Hannah decides to leave with Gabby, she and Gabby and Mark are driving through downtown Los Angeles on the way home, and they stop at this like art exhibit, and Hannah's going to take a picture of Mark and Gabby in front of this like light art fixture, and she winds up being involved in a hit and run, and she gets hit by a car, and it puts her in the hospital. And when she's in the hospital, and pretty much throughout the entirety of this timeline, this lifeline, she's in the hospital. And when she's in the hospital, she kind of goes through a lot of life changes. She winds up finding that she was pregnant with that guy Mike from New York with his child, and she wound up losing that child because she got hit by the car. So she's kind of dealing with the fact that like she wasn't ready to be a mother, but she was going to be, and how that feels losing something that you didn't know you had yet. And she also struggles with having to relearn how to live her life because she's pretty much sedentary for a couple weeks in the hospital. And so she can't really move anything without being in pain. So she has to, relearn how to walk, how to get up and down stairs, how to get, out of chairs and out of beds. And so that's a challenge. And then she meets her night nurse named Henry, and she immediately develops this relationship with him. And in this lifetime, Ethan comes to visit her in the hospital. But she realizes, like, I made the right choice by not staying at the restaurant with him. We were high school sweethearts, but we're just not meant to be. And she kind of, like, friend zones him, and they wind up becoming great friends. But this night nurse, Henry, she kind of develops a relationship with him, and in both lifetimes, she thinks she's found her person, and Henry, she believes, is that person. And so throughout her stay in the hospital, she and Henry develop like a closeness, like a tight-knit bond. And then while she's in the hospital, obviously Gabby comes to visit her, and her family comes in from London to come and visit her. And she has a rocky relationship with her family just because they've been away for so long, and they never come to visit her in any of the cities that she's lived in. And so she almost knows that she's doing better by herself and that she would prefer that her family not be there. So while she struggles with hurting their feelings by telling them like she doesn't need them but wanting them to stay because she hasn't seen them, she struggles with that. So she winds up having like a heart-to-heart with them and being like, listen, like, I've been alone a lot of my life. I don't want to be alone like that. I want you guys to come visit me, but like, I don't need you here. And like, it's making her feel worse because she's in the hospital, she's in pain, and she's got people coming up to her, giving her things, telling her what she needs to do, how she should feel. So, the whole family dynamic comes into play. And then so eventually, it becomes clear to the hospital that Henry and Hannah have like developed this relationship, and that is like not allowed because he's one of her patients, or sorry, she's one of his patients. And so the hospital staff decides to give her a new night nurse and move Henry to a different floor on a different time of day. So they wind up not being able to see each other by the time that Hannah is able to leave the hospital. So she tries to make a point to go and see him and say bye when she leaves the hospital, but she can't find him, and the hospital staff on the confidentiality terms won't tell her where he is. So she winds up just kind of leaving with Gabby, and basically being like, if it's meant to happen, it will, and if it doesn't, it wasn't meant to. Maybe in a different life or a different time, I'll meet Henry again. And so they go home, and when Hannah is home with Gabby, they find out that Gabby's husband, Mark, who was noticeably distant and noticeably like not there when Hannah was in the hospital, which you would think is weird. It's her best friend's husband. You'd think he'd come and visit once or twice, but he was noticeably not there. And they get home, and he basically tells her that, he's met somebody else at work, and he is going to be leaving he's going to be leaving Gabby, and they kind of deal with the consequences that come after that. So as Hannah is learning how to recover and learn how to kind of be a person again after her accident and being in the hospital, her and Gabby kind of depend on each other to help each other, lift their spirits, where Hannah's learning how to walk again and Gabby is learning how to live with the fact that her husband left her. And so, long story short, months after Hannah's in the hospital, her big thing is that she's really into like cinnamon buns, and everyone knows that like that's her thing. She's out in Los Angeles at Primo's at this bakery that has like really good cinnamon buns apparently, and she winds up running into Henry, and he left her a note when she left the hospital, basically saying like, because of patient confidentiality, I can't reach out to you or give you my number, but if you happen to see me in public and you say hi first, we can talk. And so Hannah sees him in line at Primo's, they wind up talking, and eventually that leads to Hannah and Henry forming an actual relationship. And Hannah realizes that she needs to get her life on track. She finally wants to have a purpose, and she knows that she wants to remain in Los Angeles. Her family wanted her to move to London, but she knew that her home was with Gabby and was in Los Angeles and with Henry. And so she decides to work at Hannah's dad's doctor's office. She decides to go to school for her nursing degree, and her and Henry wind up being a couple and living together, and Gabby finds her person from high school. They knew each other, they just never dated, and then she wound up finding him when she got divorced. And pretty much like that's how that lifetime ends, where Gabby and Hannah finally found their people, they found their purpose, they found what they were meant to do, and that's that. In the other timeline, Hannah decides to stay at the restaurant with Ethan that night instead of leaving with Gabby. And basically in this one, she makes a lot more rash decisions than she did. Obviously, she can't make rash decisions in the hospital because she's in the hospital, like she can't really do much. But in this lifetime, she decides that her and Ethan were meant to be, and she's going to kind of see it through. And so in this timeline, right away, she lives with Gabby and Mark per usual, but she knows that she needs to get her life back on track. So while she's kind of living in between Mark and Gabby's and Ethan's, she decides to go and get a car. She again works for Gabby's dad's doctor's office, and she decides to again go to school to get her nursing degree because she feels like that's her purpose. Because when she was in the hospital, she saw how much people cared for their patients, and she wanted to do that. But in this lifetime, working at at Gabby's dad's doctor's office, she was a receptionist, and she saw how much people cared about their patients and how much parents cared about their children, and she wanted to be that person for other people. And so she decides to do all that, and in this lifetime, she's trying to be a lot more sensible. she's trying to make a lot more choices that are a little bit more mature and a little bit more responsible than her usual. Like, for instance, her car. She would typically get like an outlandish, crazy colored car, but in this one, she gets like, a gray car, a basic one, because she's trying to make more like adult decisions. And so in this one, her and Ethan are kind of living together. They're kind of figuring out how to live together. They wind up finding a dog on the street and taking her in and taking care of her. So Hannah's making all of these decisions and choices without really having anything set in stone yet. And then she finds out that she is pregnant with that guy, Mike's child, and she decides that she is going to keep the baby and raise the baby and be okay being a single mother. And she reaches out to that guy Mike from New York, but the guy says that he doesn't want anything to do with her or the child, and that their relationship has already ruined what he had with his wife and his other children. And so Hannah kind of gets that closure, and she becomes okay with raising a child on her own and doing part-time school to get her nursing degree and working part-time at the doctor's office. So she's figuring out how to do this along, and she has her dog with her. And at the same time, there was a day when Gabby and Hannah went to go visit Mark, Gabby's husband, at work, and the elevator opens and they see Mark with another woman. And he explains to Gabby that he has been having an affair for about a year, and they quickly, domino effect into a divorce, and Mark moves out of the house, and, he leaves the story, so that's where their story ends. And then Hannah decides to confide in Ethan that she is pregnant, but it's with Mike's kid, and her and Ethan, in kind of a shock twist I wasn't really expecting, but I appreciated. Ethan is basically like, I'm not ready to be a dad. I knew I said I didn't want to lose you, but I'm not ready to be a dad, especially to someone that isn't my own. And he basically was like, I don't think this is going to work out. We said if it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't meant to be. So, it's not going to work out. And they both are kind of like, okay, like, it is what it is. So Hannah decides to move out of Ethan's place and formally move in with Gabby. And like in the other lifetime, they help each other and they build each other up. Hannah helps Gabby recover from a shock divorce and a shock affair that she wasn't expecting, and Gabby helps Hannah prepare to have a child and have a whole new list of expectations and jobs and all that good stuff. And so then you flash forward a couple months later again, and Gabby has again met that guy from high school. His name's Jesse. That guy, they've met now that they've both divorced, and they are now a couple again in this lifetime. And then in this one also, there's a day where Ethan comes by the house, and it's while Hannah is about, I think, 7 or 8 months pregnant. So she's almost about to give birth to her daughter. And Ethan basically says, like, we're meant to be, I knew we were meant to be, I needed time to warm up to the idea of being a dad figure to someone that I wasn't prepared to be yet, and basically was like, I've waited so long for you to come back to Los Angeles, I've waited so long for us to be back together, that I'm willing to do it for you, and we'll figure it out, and all that good stuff. So basically, at the end of this lifetime, Gabby and her fiance, Jesse, they're preparing for their wedding, and Hannah is working at the doctor's office. She is getting her nursing degree, and her and Ethan are expecting their child, their first child, and Hannah's second. So I think in general, this was a really cool concept and a really cool book. I think it's so interesting to see like the what ifs and what can happen when you make one decision. I think the butterfly effect is a very cool concept in that one choice, one decision can change the outcome of everything, no matter how tiny that decision is. And I think it was very interesting to see in each lifetime the person that Hannah knew was for her. But I also think it was really interesting in that, she had a found family. Because in each lifetime, her family tried to persuade her to come back to London, whether it was because she was recovering from her surgery from the hospital or because she was going to be raising a child. And in both of those lifetimes, she decided to stay in Los Angeles with Gabby, with her found family, with Ethan or Henry, depending on either lifetime. And so I think the found family aspect was a pretty sweet one as well. And so my rating of this book, I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think this book was awesome. It's not one of my favorites of Taylor Jenkins Reid's. I think Seven Husbands and Malibu Rising were much better, but not to say that this one is not great. This is probably like my third favorite of hers. So great book, great concept, really well written, super easy to get through. The chapters aren't long, the book's not very long. And I think it's a great little beach read if you want kind of like a simple, fun, but interesting, thorough book. So I think this book was awesome. I would highly, highly recommend. And do not forget to stay updated with me on Instagram and Goodreads. And I'll see you for the next episode.